Hello, guys. I hope you're well. I hope you can hear me. I hope everything is going well, guys. How are you? Today is Sunday, the 2nd of February. Excuse me, I was saying it was the 28th. Sorry, the 2nd of March. I was saying it was the 28th of February, thinking that we actually had like the 30th. And now I'm like in denial that it's actually March. I hope you can hear me. I really do hope so. Just to make sure, I'm going to listen to myself also on using my phone. So, but anyway, today we have a very interesting discussion because we're going to talk about the aftermath of COVID. You know, COVID really was it was a game changer. Throughout the whole world, it was a game changer. But before I go on, I'm going to get confirmation from Susan here. Yes, it's hot, Susan. Are you feeling very hot?
Ah, I'm feeling hot.
I am telling you, it is so hot. I bet you when it starts raining, it's going to be flooding.
It's going to
Can
be
you?
what?
Flooding. It's going to be
Wh-
flooding.
When?
No, I said when it starts to rain in March. You know, in March, that's when the rains start.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
We
yeah,
have the
yeah.
beginning of the short rains. I bet you it's going
Mm-hmm.
to start flooding. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Extremes, extreme.
Yeah. Can you hear me
Yeah,
clearly?
yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, that's fabulous. Okay, that's good. Yeah. All right,
Yeah.
guys. So today we have a very interesting topic. I tell you, like I was saying, COVID was a game changer. COVID left lasting impacts on the whole world. I believe that everybody's behavior changed dramatically and drastically. A lot of things happened, as you know, you guys, during COVID. Where were you? Do you remember where you were? Do you remember how you felt? Your emotions? Who was around you? Were you around your family or were you in school? Where were you when we were told, time to lock down, time to stop your business, isolate, 6 meters, everybody? When they started putting steps in the supermarkets, footsteps. When in Kenya we had to go in and before you go into any supermarket, you have to sanitize it. They have to sanitize your hands in addition to all the other security checks because we are a target here in Kenya from Al Shabaab and other people like that. Where were you when we had to wash our fruits? People were using all kinds of solutions. That's when I learned what vegetable wash was. I had no idea before that. Yeah, at least even if I did, I didn't care. Yeah. Where were you when if somebody sneezed, literally you would take them to court? It was almost a court case if anyone decided to cough or sneeze near you. And the anxiety levels were so high. Everybody was suspect. I remember that period. I actually happened to be in the UK, and I had just joined my husband not too long before, and I found it so interesting because there was nobody on the streets. You see, I had just come from Mombasa in Kenya, where people were still walking around. I decided to isolate in the coast. For some reason, my instincts drew me to the coast. Why? Because I felt if anything happens, I can get on a boat and head off to Tanzania. I don't know what it was in my head. I wanted to be somewhere near a border. I didn't want to be somewhere inside in the hinterland. So I drove to Mombasa, and I also know that in the coast, a lot of people believed that the salt water was responsible for helping them avoid all the symptoms of COVID, like pneumonia and stuff like that, which is not necessarily true, except that they did say that high humidity meant that the virus would not be transmitted as quickly as in, for example, dry conditions. But anyway, that's the science of it. Right now, I'm just talking about how you felt. How was your mental health? I remember it was my husband and myself, and I remember looking outside and wondering where everybody was. There was nobody on the streets. In Wales, in Cardiff, nobody was walking around. It was cold around March, April, and it was just quiet. Nothing happening. Nobody going to work. All the cars were still parked. The only people who were going to work were nurses, what they called the important, anyway, what do they call them? The the necessary workers. What do they call, Susan? You know, those workers anyway. Yeah, key
Essential
workers. We
workers.
call them key workers. Yes,
Essential workers.
yeah,
Essential
yeah.
workers.
The key workers, the dustbin people. Those guys would come take the trash, and I would wonder to myself, you guys are coming to pick up trash like what? Like needles that are packed with the virus pandemic. I remember feeling so insecure and worrying. But at the same time, because I was listening to a lot of conspiracy theorists, I really was. I wanted to listen to an alternative story because I wasn't actually interested in listening to mainstream media because I felt like it was too much. It was scaring me. It was my way of trying to avoid anxiety. But anyway, where were you guys? Do you remember where you were? Do you remember? Join us in the StreamYard as we chat about this because we're talking about the lasting mental health effects of COVID 19. Yeah? Because it's still felt today. Now, for the first time, much more than before, we hear a lot of people dropping words like anxiety, depression. And actually, there are studies that have shown that it rose significantly since the pandemic. And why? Because of uncertainty and isolation and fear. Again, PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. Many people, especially healthcare workers and those who lost loved people or people who were sick, they experienced a lot of trauma that led to post traumatic stress disorder. Yeah? And that one, comes with a lot of things. And substance abuse. Talking about substance abuse in Mombasa, that is when we saw people sitting in their cars by shops that sell alcohol, and those alcohol shops were doing booming business because people could not go into clubs, pubs. Now the clubs and pubs became that, especially for men who are not used to sitting around their wives and children at home. Most of them were congregating in cars in the coast and sitting outside of you know, uh, what do we say, Pombe, the places where they sell, shops that sell alcohol. Yeah, that was their idea of isolating, sitting in their car and drinking in there. So there was a lot more of that, and it seemed to be acceptable. I also saw that in the UK, where I saw a lot of people buying a lot of alcohol, even from supermarkets. There was a lot of that. Again, I also saw, okay, what else was there? The social isolation and the loneliness that people were feeling, it caused people to develop mental health conditions. A lot of people were taking pills, to try to sort out their anxiety problems. Yeah. And relationships were really strained because children, for the first time, were at home and people had to work from home. And it was really difficult for many people to multitask, looking after little children and their needs, and also looking after the interests of their workers, their workplace. So there was a lot of gender-based violence. Actually, those are spiked, and then there was a lot of breakups, divorces. A lot of people filed for divorce, even if they couldn't even do it at that time. A lot of couples broke up during that period because that was like the longest time they had ever spent with each other. Again, we had stresses in terms of economics. The economic stresses, job insecurity. A lot of people's jobs became redundant. Yeah, and a lot of people became financially stressed because they were responsible for feeding. Food was so expensive, and a lot of people had their food delivered home because they had little children. They couldn't run to the supermarkets, especially in the West. I'm talking about in the West. Here in Kenya, there was a lot of people who were ill, depending on which city you were in. Nairobi was literally closed off. The cities were closed off from each other. It was really, really difficult because actually Nairobi was completely cordoned off compared to other places. And then at the same time, there was this shift of moving to remote work, hybrid work, and therefore a lot of people had to learn new skills that they did not have. And that was a new stressor right there. And it was leading to a lot of burnout. Now, a lot of people had to read a lot of emails. The emails were so many. And then there was a lot of use of technology to monitor workers working at home. So there was even worse work-life balance. People started working earlier and continued to work through the day and later. So it was really sad. It was a really, really difficult time. Again, there was a lot of school closing. closures and remote learning, and the children were stressed out, burnt out on their laptops. They couldn't concentrate. Imagine getting children to concentrate to a class online, let alone in the classroom. So again, that isolation of children, they were feeling emotionally and socially, you know, isolated. They couldn't play with their friends outside, so everything was indoors. The houses were probably a mess. So there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. The healthcare system was strained out, burnt out, and yet people could not really access the services. So again, another thing that caused a lot of mental health problems was the loss of life. A lot of people developed chronic illnesses. Many people developed COVID and could not be visited by their families because of the isolation. And I saw a lot of very sad stories of elderly couples that were separated. People could not go visit their grandparents. So the emotional and mental health challenge, yeah, apart from people losing their source of income, their businesses, their work, jobs, I tell you, it was a very difficult time. And I remember here in Kenya, there were people who were selling things from their cars. Um, yeah, so this was a very, very difficult time. And I believe that according to studies of today, those effects are lingering. They are lingering till now. The reason that we see very unhappy Gen Zs, for example, and millennials, were probably them and the over 50s were the most affected by the mental health problems. But let me allow Susan to also join us and have her 2 cents or three. Yeah. Welcome, Susan.
Yeah, COVID and mental health. Let's talk about the fear of catching it, the fear of somebody who you love has caught it, the fear of a friend who has caught it, and everything like that. I mean, it was just that fear, and it was every day. And even if somebody who had it, um, there were different people were responding differently to the treatment. It was very, very expensive, very, very expensive in Kenya at least. So again, that was a problem because you needed resources to be able to pay for the test, to pay for the medicine, to pay for the hospital, and stuff like that. People who ended up on, oxygen as well. Even if it was at home, that was a different cost. You had to make sure that you had a generator running so all the machines could work. Of course, the institutions or the institutions that offer nursing care at home were, they were thriving at that time because a lot of people were being taken care of at home. There were no hospital beds in Nairobi. At least we know of cases where people were looking for hospital beds, and they passed away in between one hospital bed and the other. You could even be told, oh, there's a hospital bed which is available in another county, and that sort of thing. Or we're sorry, we don't have a hospital bed. You go home as soon as one is made available. We'll call you. But meanwhile, you have to do A, B, and C. That sort of thing. And of course, if anybody heard that you had COVID, they run away from you, sort of literally run away from you. There were even somebody I know went to a hospital, and one patient who had COVID got fed up of being hospitalized, the confinement and everything. So they took off, they ran away. But the guards and everybody were afraid to go near that person because they had COVID. I mean, it was that bad. Even doctors were so vulnerable, and we know we lost a lot of doctors in this country because of COVID. And they were so vulnerable, and they were even afraid to go near the patients, but they still had to, because of their oath of, their Hippocratic oath, they have to look after patients. And so some of them actually got sick, others, passed away. And then others, even after they got it, it has taken them a long time to recover from the after effects of it. I know one of my classmates, my high school classmates, we did a fundraiser for her, and she came out, was in ICU for a very long time. And something she told us, and at least when she was sending messages on the WhatsApp, she was saying that she's having the most awful nightmares. It was the most terrifying experience she's ever had, and she was in this, surreal space. So she suffered serious mental health problems because of her experience, that near death experience. The chest, some people described it was like it was you're breathing glass. It was very, very, very painful. Others just were so, depending on which version they got, serious lethargy, serious exhaustion that makes your productivity low, and and it makes you not able to concentrate as well as you were before. So the long term effects and the psychological effects are there. Also, for those who lost a dear one, we know of cases where some people passed away and they couldn't bury their kin. They couldn't have the gathering, the normal gathering where you have family and friends coming round to visit you and commiserate with you. And when it comes to the funeral, they're with you, but they couldn't do that. There were maximum numbers. I mean, there were orders everywhere. I mean, you could only be 20 people. And that includes the chief and all those other necessary people who had to be there to bury your dear one. And in the beginning, at least in Kenya, it was being done. You had to get people in hazmat suits. Literally, you felt like you were somewhere on the moon or in an alien country. People fully in hazmat suits, and the way they're buried your dear one is you can't even go near them. Because so many things, and they were buried like strangers. So some people had to, just because of the mental, psychological effects of burying their loved ones in such a strange way. They actually had memorial services when the lockdowns were lifted up. At least in Nairobi, they did. I know I attended one where of a prominent politician, one of the very outspoken ones, and his family said, no, we have to bury him well, so that we have to have a memorial service. So when lockdown was lifted, and they had a memorial service and they posted it in the newspaper and people came. But they said it was very, very difficult for them because their grief was, they didn't have the normal comfort. The support system was not there. Even some members of their family could not come because they had to, you know, either speak on the phone or, send a link, a YouTube link. So they are watching it, whatever they can watch online. And it was very, very, very difficult. You like the older people, your grandmother say, than the mother. So for these
Mm-hmm.
guys, it was their dad. So their mother, if their shosho, their grandmother was alive, she could not come because of her age, that sort of thing, and the comorbidities that come with age, the things that made people vulnerable. And they said that those people with these particular conditions are vulnerable. And I think they were vaccinated first in our country. Um, they said you had to be 58 and above, and for those people who had comorbidities, high blood pressure and all those, I think there were several of them, heart problems and high blood pressure, and there were a number of them.
Mm-hmm.
They said, yeah, if you had any of those, you could get the vaccination. But the rollout of the vaccine here was, very gradual. So the people of 58 years and above got it. Uh, for me and one of my daughters, we got it earlier because we are caregivers to my mom, who's an elderly person, and we told them when we took her for the jab, we had to take her. She had to be escorted there, and then we said, look, we look after her. So they said there's no point of vaccinating her and not you. So we were vaccinated too. Yeah, so those are some of the things. And then again, the shock of the quiet, the streets were empty. People were so
Mm-hmm.
scared of getting that disease. The silence, people were in shock. It was surreal. I think some of the therapy people needed to have was not being able to really grasp that what we were experiencing was very real. It wasn't a dream or a nightmare. It was real. My experience as somebody who was serving in church was that all of a sudden, there was no church. We couldn't go physically to church. So when it opened
Mm-hmm.
up, so what was happening is that the preacher would preach online, and he would preach to to an empty church, but it's online. But he'd have to preach like
Mm-hmm.
there were people inside the church with him, um, singing, because that's the ministry I was in. We started the choirs. We could not all go, so initially you'd go, like the choir director and the instrumentalist, two of you. Imagine singing, doing all the singing during the service, and the service was not shortened in any way. So
So what happened after the service, Susan?
so sorry, my thing is going back and forth.
Oh,
So
it's
we
okay.
had to sing 6, 7 songs on your own, you know,
My
and
gosh.
with a lot of confidence, and it's there, it's filmed. Everybody else is watching it at home. You're singing it. You're just a few of you. We had mics only. This is your mic. You can't touch somebody else's mic. You can't stand up. You have to stand at this distance from each other. And everybody was scattered, around the place. And like you said, your temperature had to be taken before you got into the church. And then, so the funniest
Oh,
experience was you're supposed to sing some choruses. So choruses are responsorial. So I
yeah,
sing and then
yeah.
you repeat, and then oh, that was
So
so
you sing
hard.
yourself and then you repeat yourself. That is ridiculous.
The people who are supposed to be backing you up are the elders and all the few people who are in there. Some of them are not very enthusiastic about singing. So you can
Yeah.
imagine how that went. So it was very hard work.
My
You go to
trauma
church
about going
and
to church during that period was everybody was singing with a face mask. That was ridiculous, you know? You have your hymn book here and a blue face mask and you're singing through it. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing in my life. And you see it going back and forth like, and I'm taking all that air, yuck, you know? Ugh, it was really
yeah,
awful.
they said that singing, because you know when you sing, you're singing out like that, and that was one way of spreading the COVID. In fact, I
Yeah,
think there
yeah.
was one of the states, there was a choir where they practiced in a very very big hall. I think it was in the basketball ball
Mm-hmm.
auditorium in a college, and some of them got COVID. So, singing was seen as one of the ways people get infection. And one of the side effects of the COVID lockdown on churches was that some people never went back to church. So now they just watch it online, especially the elderly people. They know they have the comorbidities, those conditions. So they really don't want to try. In fact, it was very, very traumatizing, especially for them. Some of the elderly people, their children are not around. They're maybe in other parts of the world, so they were here alone in Kenya alone. And if nobody went to find out how they were, it was very difficult. In fact, I heard a story where the person would talk over the gate. They don't, you can't get into the compound, but they'll talk to you, and you're on one side of the gate and they're on the other side of the gate, and that sort of thing. And I remember one time, my mom was sitting outside, and then somebody came to the gate, and then my mom was trying to hear what you were saying, and so they started to move closer together, and I ran outside and I told him, stop, don't come any. So that anxiety when you're looking after an older person, that somebody who's young, is more resilient. But that's not the truth, because we know young people also got COVID. Um, and we thank God that phase has passed, because it was a very, very difficult time. The workers, of course, if you had workers who didn't live with you, and they came every day, you couldn't expect them to come, so you had to give them the off, for you had to give them an off until things lifted a bit, and stuff
Yeah,
like
and that
that.
had
So
its own problems because if they couldn't work, they couldn't get paid, right? So how would they eat?
yeah,
Again, they also
yeah,
became. I have a friend who actually started raising funds through house help for people in the village, in the community. Lots of people lost their jobs. Hotels closed. Yeah, like people could not sleep in those rooms anymore. So a lot of people, like in the coast, those people who rely on income from from hotels, from selling bed space, their businesses like tanked, and they've never actually recovered. Do you know that most of them have not recovered? They
Yeah,
haven't.
even the entertainment
Yes.
business and hotels, like you said.
Yeah.
We were in Lamu for my nephew's wedding about 3 years ago. I think 21, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
2021. And they told us that most of the hotels in Lamu are closed. About 100 hotels
Yeah.
were closed because of COVID. And they
Yeah.
couldn't, people lost their jobs. There was a lot of unemployment as a result of that. The other challenge was the
Mm-hmm.
curfew. The curfews that were set, at least in Kenya, there were curfews that were set. And I can't remember the first curfew. I don't know whether it was 9 o'clock or something like that. So it was very
Mm-hmm.
stressful. When they allowed people to start moving around, they said you have to be
Yeah.
home by this time, certain time. So it was very difficult. So um, in the initial stages where nobody was literally moving, hardly moving, and in fact we were
Yeah.
delivering. You were calling in your market supplies were being delivered at home. The border guys, really, the riders, they were thriving. They did a booming economy, going up and down, doing the shopping
Yeah.
for you and bringing it to your house because you couldn't go. So the other thing was having usually in a home, people are out during the day, and then you meet in the evening. So let's say it's a husband, wife, and children, that sort of situation. So the husband is not usually in the house during the day, and now all of a sudden things have changed, and you're all in this house, all the whole day. You're all in the house. It caused a lot of stress to everybody. In fact, that was very stressful for everybody because the dynamics in the home during the day changed, and so the husband is there. In fact, there was a lot of quarreling, a lot of marriages, like you said, experience a lot of stress and distress and strain, and criticism, and people got to learn and understand people better. And in fact, they said that the domestic violence all over the world actually increased, I think, by something like 30%. It was that bad. And in some cases, like in Australia, I know of this case where the employer actually had to come up with a way of supporting their workers who are working at home for their safety. So they had some safety strategy for their female workers who are working at home, because there were a lot of reports of domestic violence. So the workers could not work. So they actually had to come up with a strategy to support them. For the choir, by the way, our choir, we had to draw a policy, draw a policy on how the choir is supposed to conduct itself during the this COVID season, about distances, not touching each other's books, not sharing, nobody's to share, to be how you had to sing while you are masked. And meanwhile, the sound guys are really complaining because of the sound. They're saying it was very muffled, and they're saying we can't hear you clearly. Of course, there was so many rules. The young people are not very good at keeping them, but generally speaking, it was like we're living in a completely different world. Look at the sports clubs as well, where people used to go to keep fit. You go to the gym at the sports club, run around the track or whatever it is you're supposed to. You couldn't go there anymore. So some people had real problems with their routines. The change of routines, it really affected them mentally. And in fact, some people were told to, because of the routine of waking up in the morning, driving your children to school, going to work, coming back. When they had to change that routine, it was so devastating to them. They were, the counselors, I heard this counselor saying he had to tell his client, okay, dress up, do your morning routine, get up, ready, go, pick your bag, get into your car, drive around the block, come back, get out, and get into the house. And that's what that routine that sort of helped to mitigate against that sense of loss and that sense of despair and feeling like you've lost direction, which can cause now depression and other stresses. So it was a very, very, very difficult season for everybody, and not even being able to see um, a group of friends all at one time, even as they lifted the curfews and they lifted the conditions. You couldn't meet in a large crowd. You had to be few of you. Otherwise, you'd have the chief or uh, somebody coming to arrest you for having more than so many people in your compound or so many people in your house or something like that. So it was very, very, very stressful. You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you very much. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. I think now I'm okay. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, Susan. Those are very many, many points, and thank you for those. Yeah, really, really true. I can imagine you having, you work with the choir, and how many different rules and policies came up as about, and not just at the choir. Any working environment, there were policies everywhere. There were policies on vaccinations. People had to go to work. Some people were dropped. Doctors, nurses lost their jobs. The ones who refused to be vaccinated. The number of vaccinations and boosters that people had to have, that was, they were mandatory, yeah, for some people. Again, there was also like a Grace agenda. Grace is actually in the comment section, and she says, please do not forget the impact, I mean, the rising, what did she say here? Yeah, I was asking her actually to come into the stream here, and she said that she doesn't have good connectivity, but she says she's tuned in from Embakasi, Kenya, and she says, remember the increase of gender-based violence incidences in homes because of reduced income and other dynamics. Absolutely, Grace. Yes, and I remember this clearly, like night and day. First of all, in the home, because of being people being forced to work together, I remember that Theresa May at that particular time actually shone light on this issue, and she warned the government that once the lockdowns were over, nobody should be forced to work from home because it could increase domestic abuse. Okay, and she was a former prime minister of the UK at that time, and I was in the UK at that time. This woman doesn't have, she has a good relationship with her husband, and she doesn't have children. But one thing I really used to like about Theresa May is that she has a real heart for families and for children and for women especially. She is the one who came up with a new policy when she was prime minister, that the dependents would not have to give up all the income from the houses that the parents left them. Okay, because what usually happens is, for example, if your parent is old and moves into a nursing home, then the children, the dependents, usually the government will sell the home and give a very small proportion back to the dependents, the children. But she stopped that, and she increased the amount that the dependents would actually get. Yeah. Again, when it came to COVID, she was the number one voice for women and for anyone for let's just say for GBV. She said that victims regard work as a safe place, and employers need to think about that. Do you know that at work, people feel safe? Are you aware that in your workplace, there are people who are there who actually dread going back home? This applies to both women and men. And this is why for many workers, many of them don't go back home immediately. They loiter around, they linger around, yeah, and they try to figure out what they could do. And so she actually she said that if you are a victim and suddenly find yourself at home all day, every day of the week with your abuser, then that's really difficult. And she also talked about the fact that perpetrators were more likely to offend in that environment because their coping mechanisms are no longer available to them. So some of these perpetrators, their coping mechanisms are to stay away from the people that they abuse every day, or to go out with their buddies, with their friends. And so apparently domestic abuse traditionally is seen as something that happens behind closed doors. But she said it was a crime and it's not right that a human being should be subjected to abuse, and we need to make people aware of that. Yeah. So basically, the Home Office minister at that time, Victoria Atkins, promised that measures in the domestic abuse bill would provide support to victims and survivors of abuse. Okay, but apparently the legislation needed to include better protections for migrant women as well. So women and men in different categories, especially women, because most of the perpetrators were men. So basically, I remember her standing up in Parliament and discussing this issue exactly at that particular time, and I was really proud of her. I was really, really proud of her because I didn't actually know how dangerous it was. I do remember in the UK, people, it doesn't just happen behind closed doors. People run out. I don't know what told people to run outside. You hear people literally yelling and screaming outside their doors. Yeah, and you're always opening the curtain to watch, the movie in the neighborhood. Domestic violence actually happens not behind closed doors, but I think people have been taught to run out, and other people have been taught to run and support the person who is being abused, run after them. Yeah. If a child, I think, is abused behind closed doors, I think they're advised to run outside. So there's a tendency in the UK to see abuse being perpetrated on people right outside on their doorsteps. It's quite interesting. In Africa, the way it is, behind closed doors, people in the UK, they run out and they scream and they shout expletives at each other. Can't even explain, what they say. And then they come back again, and they call each other all kinds of names. So yeah, this is something that happened during COVID. Again, in Mombasa, where I was initially, there was a lot of abuse of little girls. There was a very high level of child pregnancy, teenage pregnancy. Girls, girls were subjected to, to trauma by being left with perpetrators, men, because they were not going to school. So there was a very high pregnancy rate, pregnancy outside marriage rate, and very high cases of rape. In fact, I saw of grape, they call it grape, right? I saw there was a story at that particular time about an old man who was taking advantage of a 12-year-old girl in the coast, and actually in the full knowledge of her mother. Her mother used to send her to that old man, yeah, so that she could get a few shillings to bring back home for food, because these people could not eat. So they send their little girls to go satisfy old men. And those old men give a little bit. I tell you, when you saw that little 12-year-old girl, because we were shown her by the media, it was a very, very sad and very moving story. There was a lot of abuse. And I wonder what happened to those little children. I wonder where they are. Because I know Grace has told me about stories about the post-election violence in Kenya, and the children who are born out of grape during that period are now 16 years old. So we should also count the age of the children who are born during the 2020 lockdown period, because it's another traumatic event that affected so many children, young girls, and I believe those children are now 4 years old. Yeah, and that's very sad, very, very, very sad. Yeah. So when it comes to that, so let's talk about it now in terms of mental health. Yeah. Um, are we saying that COVID is the only precursor to mental health? That there were no mental health issues before COVID? No, we're not saying that, because we know that even before the pandemic, mental health disorders like anxiety, depression, suicide, they were on the rise in many parts of the world. Why? Because at that time we're also experiencing a financial pressure. Many countries were experiencing financial pressures at that time. Okay, but then that pandemic came and actually just exacerbated, amplified those trends. Okay, so what happened is that unfortunately, mental health used to go unreported and there was a lot of stigma around it. But one of the positive things that came from COVID is that now, because the problem was documented and people were given advice about what to do, I think that now the mental health issues are not as stigmatized or underreported as they are, because a lot of the young people who came from that period actually are happy to to open up and talk about it, because they kind of like they kind of say, like, for example, the Gen Z, okay, the pandemic, they say that it significantly impacted their happiness and mental well-being. But out of all the generations, they're the most outspoken of all. Okay, and they talk about the fact that they are unhappy at work, and now they're talking about the great detachment. At one point, there was the great resignation. Do you remember everybody was resigning from their jobs just before COVID and even just after? Yeah, and now Gen Zs are unhappy, and what they're doing is detaching. Yeah, and so there was the Gen Zs and the millennials were reporting a decline in engagement. They reported a decline in engagement with their workers because there was a Gallup poll. There was a poll of these people in the UK, of people, the millennials and the Gen Zs, and some of the results from that Gallup poll was that uh, the vast majority of workers in every single office reported that they're either not engaged or actively disengaged. This is the American Staffing Association. Okay? Approximately 3 in 10 employees are not engaged at work. They're not. They're actively disengaged. That means unhappy. They're not concentrating. They're not there, you know? So those employees, they're feeling trapped in a job that is unsatisfactory, with half of all Americans now looking for new roles. So we used to have the great resignation, and it yielded a hot job market, because what happened is that now there were jobs available. But now it's stagnated, because now workers are stuck and detached. So people are kind of like in a catch-22 situation. They need the money, but they don't want to go back to work. And they were saying that of all the generations, the Gen Zs are the ones who have set boundaries more than any other group in history. They have set boundaries intentionally, and they said you don't go beyond this. And finally the results are showing that employers are lagging behind. They're lagging behind in terms of prioritizing mental health, diversity, sustainability, and work-life balance. Yeah. So you see, the Gen Zs they're like, we're not going to engage. We're going to disengage, and that's it. We're not going to work, or we just they call it the quiet resignation, or the quiet holiday vacation. They go on vacation, staycation. Those are words that actually we have just heard recently. A staycation. I'm going on a staycation. What is a staycation? Never heard of that before. Grace is saying, um, yeah, let's talk about the experience, the trauma that families experience when one is unable to attend burials. Absolutely, Grace. In fact, Susan talked about that extensively just before you joined us. Yeah, the fact that families really experience a lot of trauma. And that happened, at least I was in the UK at that time, and there were so many people whose grandparents passed, or even elderly couples who could not see each other, they were waving at each other from the windows. Yeah, it was so painful. I remember this elderly man who used to come every day with flowers, and because he couldn't give them to his wife, who was in the nursing home, he would stand outside and hold the flowers up every day, a new bouquet of flowers. I mean, an elderly man. That was so traumatic, really. How many people lost their lives? We had so many elderly people lost their lives. Again, the issue of inequality came up very, very, what do you say, very blatantly, especially in the US. We found that there was inequality in terms of access to medications, access to care, access to quality care and information. We saw videos, very traumatizing videos, of healthcare professionals, including doctors, begging for specific regimens to be used on them while they were in intensive care, having given service to, given service to, like, cared for people who were suffering from COVID and then catching it themselves, and then begging for that medication to be used on them, and it being denied them because it had not passed the approval of the I think it's called the FDA. I think it's called, yeah, yeah, the CDC. I think, yeah, it had not passed the approval. They were still in testing phase, but everything was a test. So the question was, why is it that some countries can get this medication, some countries could get the vaccination, some could not, some were hoarding vaccinations until they even got spoiled. Like in the UK, they had vaccinations to go through the whole population 4 times. That's 16 million people. They could get 4 boosters, and they kept them. And many of those vaccinations were eventually destroyed. And yet, in some countries, people could not get vaccinations. The ones who really needed it could not get it. Yeah. And then Grace is saying also, in some parts of the world, bodies were cremated, and in others, they were denied the normal mourning period, like those from Western Kenya. Oh, it was literally disposal and not burial. Absolutely. True, Grace. Wow, those are wonderful points, wonderful talking points. Yeah. That it's true because a lot of people were buried within a period that they were not, that was not traditionally accepted. So people could not grieve and they could not mourn their loved ones. I remember seeing those very traumatizing videos in India of people, burning their loved ones, literally.
Mm,
So many
mm,
piles of wood everywhere. Do you guys remember? Do you know, I think we have a tendency of moving too fast away from trauma, forgetting that all these things leave an imprint in our psyche and in our memory. And I think
mm,
a lot of people now look at death in a different way, death and dying. One of the things I can say is that a lot of people are not afraid of it anymore, the way they were. And so you see a very high suicide rate. People are acting very irresponsibly. Many people are saying that they're checked out of the world. They don't care. They're not working. Again, valuation of work is now lower. Many people don't see the need to go to work. They think it's not a priority. They should travel the world, enjoy life because life is short. There's a new appreciation for life. There's a new appreciation for the environment. And I think that mentally, our health is either better or worse after that pandemic, depending on how you react to
yeah.
COVID. But definitely, it has an impact. And for those people who lost their businesses and their work, many have still not recovered. Many
Mm,
have not recovered. Many.
yeah.
Yeah, we are
This
seeing
is
this. By the
true.
way, let me tell you a story. I went to town the day before yesterday. When was this? Actually, on Saturday. Do you know how shocked I was? I haven't been to Nairobi for about a year. I haven't been inside, gone inside to walk inside Nairobi, maybe for a year or a year and a half. I haven't. Because fortunately, the shops are everywhere, so I didn't feel I needed to go. But there were some things I needed, and the only place I could get them was Biashara Street. So I went to Biashara Street. Guess what I found? I was so surprised to see concrete jungle, literally so many new buildings coming up. But on the other hand, I did not see development. I did not see roads that were paved properly. There was so much dust. It was so hot. Many of the shops have people sitting outside them, selling outside on the pavement. There's no order in Nairobi. The shops were like literally empty on a Saturday afternoon. The parking guys, let me tell you, I was introduced to the city center with a 2,000 shilling fine, yeah, by one of the council askaris walking around. Why? Because somebody decided, I went with somebody who'd driven me, and I got out of the car and just said, I just want to go into this shop. Let me go in and pick something because there was no parking. Guess what? The guy just came and said, I'm going to slap you with a 10,000 fine. You have to give me 2,000 or go to wherever, whatever. Yeah. And the driver just gave him whatever he had on him. And we said that was the introduction to Nairobi. Welcome to Nairobi. Nairobi. So you immediately, the corruption level in Nairobi is on another level right now. People are hungry. They're making money in very unconstitutional ways. Instead of making money with business, they don't care. There's kind of that lack of care for humanity. That humanity seems to have left. That's what I'm seeing. People are just there to eat. And that's the culture of our city right now. And Grace is saying, if
Yeah.
we were to have a similar pandemic, would our current health system be able to manage the shift and
Oh,
shock
no.
drama and allow Susan to? to respond to that
Oh,
one?
oh no, certainly not. We'd have a serious, serious crisis, and we thank God it didn't happen when we had this crisis. NHIF at least was helping people, and it helped a lot of people. Yeah, in fact, I was going on just on that. I was going to add that there was this fear of shortage of PPEs, the gloves, the masks, and there was a lot of fear that you couldn't find them, that you couldn't get the particular one that you wanted, and you had to look for so many places, and they were expensive. So people started washing. Do you know people were washing their masks? They were washing them and hanging them outside because they couldn't afford to buy the mask. It was such a life lifestyle change, having to wear these masks all the time, and then the especially the gloves were the and the sanitizers, something to wash your hands with. There were all these places all over the place, and you needed to wash your hands. So it was very, very stressful, especially when you couldn't find them and you needed to get them, because you'd go into the supermarket and you'd find people just rushing to get like a box, and at the right price, because you had to have quite a few. If you had like a family, you'd have to come in with a box. And our children went to school wearing these masks, um, and some of them did their exams, their final exams. This was another anxiety, because there were exams that were sat that first year. Do you remember the children were home until the schools, and we were there as parents trying to teach them from the house. They were attending class online, that it took a while for it to go online, and it was such a big challenge for them to pick up the different way of going to school. um my daughter was doing her Form 4 exam that year, so it was very, very, very tough. They had to read, they had to study. Some of her classmates had COVID. They sat their exams in a separate place. They couldn't mix with the others. And that time people didn't really want to talk about who has COVID and who doesn't have COVID. And then, of course, the anger of a parent is that, is it your child who infected my child? Because it was a very stressful time, I'm telling you. And yeah, and the other thing that was very bad that was happening during that time was, as a result of COVID and that confinement of families in homes, especially in the high density areas, the slums, where the children and the father and the mother are all in one small space. Um, One place where I went to do work outside Kenya, there were reported cases of incest, where brothers and sisters got into relationships with each other, and they even had children. And so now the community health workers were trying to deal with that issue, and it was quite serious. The other case that I'd like to talk about relating to the family was, there was, I don't know whether you remember, where this man, he actually unalived in the US. He unalived his wife, and he used the COVID uh, um, crisis to as an excuse, because when the relatives were, because the people were calling, and people would call and say, how is so and so, can I talk to them on the phone, that sort of thing. And says, oh, she got COVID and she went to a hospital. Which hospital did she go to? I don't know. Blah blah blah. So the family followed it up, and eventually found out that he had actually unalived his wife, and buried her somewhere, and lied. He took advantage of the COVID thing to say that she had gone to a hospital. He doesn't know where she went, and that sort of thing, and completely denied culpability. Of course, when they did the investigation, they found out what he had done. There was a lot of masking and opportunities that were taken at that time, where people thought they could do nefarious things. Again, in the UK, one of my classmates was saying, she lives there, and she was saying how there was so much fear. There was a time the numbers were really high in the UK, and she said there was so much fear that you could not even have more than, is it 2 guests or something like that in your home. So the neighbors would report you if 3 guests came. The police would be knocking on your door. You have three guests instead of two guests. I mean, so it was a lot of fear, even that, you know,
Yes, but
reporting that neighborly.
Meanwhile on Downing Street, they were busy having parties.
Yeah, I
You remember? Mm-hmm.
remember. I remember
Yeah, they
something
were busy
that,
having parties in Downing Street. It was really bad, actually. You know, the parliamentarians
yeah,
themselves were not actually held to the same standards, and that was, the rising in the inequality was great during that period. Again, before you continue, I wanted to also add one thing before I forget, is that the inequality was so great that a lot of blue collar workers actually took their lives. Men, a lot of men actually committed suicide. That's something that's not been actually talked about much. But you see, because white collar workers could take their work home and work online, blue collar workers could not go and build a road online. They have to be on the road, building it. They have to build the bridges. They have to actually collect the trash. They have to, apart from that, these are blue collar workers, people who go out to work, cooks, chefs in hotels. They can't do that online. There's some jobs that just cannot be done online. So a lot of blue collar workers, men, found themselves without a salary. A lot of people found themselves homeless. A lot of people could not get even that medical care because they couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford the insurance. Despite the fact that Gen Zs were disengaged, fact is that because of the cooling off economy right now, they're trapped because yes, you're disengaged, but employers are not hiring anymore, not at the same level that they were hiring before. So you're forced to accept the job or not. And usually you'll just accept it, but you're not there. You've checked out. You're not really in the office or you're not really in the job. So again, employers are complaining about the quality of the work, the burnout, the lack of interest of their employees. So this is something that, these are long-standing. We are experiencing, yes, does the world have a mental health crisis from the COVID 2020 lockdowns? Yes, absolutely. People over the age of 50 were also affected very badly because, again, when you're 50 years old already, you're less employable. It brought about this thing of ageism. Yeah, a lot of people over the age of 50 could not go back to work. They were now at the point where should just be preparing for their retirement in their 60s. So the last 10, 15 years are so critical for somebody's lifespan and work span. And these are people who are caught between looking after their aging parents and looking after their children, their teenage kids and grown up, young adults' children. So it becomes, very burdensome for somebody who's over 50. So the rate of depression has increased greatly for people over the age of 50 right now. Those are some of the impacts of the COVID situation. And so we do have a mental health crisis in the country, in the world, sorry, in the country and in the world, we do. And it should be acknowledged, and we should all not have fear of talking about it. Let's talk about it. Let's understand if you are experiencing stress, anxiety, depression, fear, anger, yeah, dissatisfaction, and everything, all those horrible, feelings that you feel. Yeah, if you're experiencing a financial crisis, you're not alone. That's the reason why we decided to bring this show, to tell you that you are not alone. We are not alone, and none of us is excluded from this. Even those people who are doing well. If you're doing well in business and you don't have anybody to buy your product, what is the point? If you're doing well in business, and what that means is that you have a higher dependency load, that means you have more people depending on you. That means that you can't enjoy your wealth like you used to before. So I think that from now on, we should start learning to open up and talk about it. The fact that, because this is something that is going to continue, be carried on for generations. A lot of young people right now cannot have children, not because they can't have them biologically, but because they can't plan for them because of the financial situation that we are in the world. Yeah, and lots of the insecurity. Now you add to the fact that people are losing their jobs all over the world, as you can see, it just gets worse. So a lot of young people, all I can tell, and also people over the age of 50, should be aware that we are in this together. We are all in this together. And we should try our best to rise above it, to rise above the situation and look internally for what we can do to improve our situation. individually
Yeah.
through our
Yeah,
gifts and
indeed.
our talents. This is the time to bring out your gift and your talent, to try to differentiate yourself from other people. Do you know, guys, everybody has a special gift and talent, and they can use it for making money. You can actually monetize it. And if we can differentiate ourselves, then you will create a market, a demand and supply thing. Yeah? People will demand your gift and your talent. So, whatever it is, yeah, rise above it. Do the best you can to rise above it. Don't get caught on in a job that you hate. Try your best to work your way out of it because it's not sustainable going forward. It's not good for your mental health. It's not good for your emotional health. It's not good for you. It's dangerous, actually. Yeah. So it's important for us to recognize that there's a mental health crisis that was brought on not because it's your fault, not by you, but by the pandemic, you know, and by COVID, period. And I'm so happy now because we have the freedom to discuss this issue. I saw Elon Musk talking about it on Twitter, and also J.D. Vance from the U.S., the deputy, the vice president. He talked about his experience with the vaccinations. You know, these two were actually having a chat on Twitter about it. I think it's called X. I really like the fact that now people are openly talking about it. There's less censorship, so we can talk and help each other and share, so that we can come out of this emotional mental health crisis that most of us have been experiencing because of experiencing trauma from the pandemic period. I want to share with you a few statistics before I almost wind up. By the way, the show is almost coming to an end, and so I'll be asking Susan for her final comments. But before that, before we go, I wanted to share with you a few interesting data. Um, that, for example, the cost to the world in terms of productivity by disengagement, the disengagement cost, there's a cost to workers and to the world. It's $8.8 trillion in productivity. Yeah? So when you have a vast majority of workers in your office that are not engaged or actively disengaged, it's a risk to your bottom line, to your profits. Yeah? So when they talk about the fact that 3 in 10 employees are not engaged at work, 17% are actively disengaged, unhappy, many of them calling in sick, taking leave days, going on staycations and vacations, not investing in themselves. I don't know what it is like in Africa, but I know this is a big problem in the West. Yeah? 30% of Gen Zs are burned out and 10,000 pounds or more in debt. People are in debt right now. Debt is one of the things that causes mental health crisis, causes mental health problems. Yeah? So if you have Gen Zs who are 10,000 pounds in debt, and many of them moving back home to their mother's houses or their parents' houses, they transfer that debt over to their parents. Grace is saying if we were to have a similar pandemic with our current health system, okay, she said that already. Yeah. So basically, guys, we are in a problem. Don't disengage from your work. Work on changing your circumstances because we can't change what already happened to us, but we can try to work our way out of it. And every generation has to go through some sort of crisis. For us, it was COVID, and I believe that for previous generations, it's even war. Yeah, there are many things, but for us, we saw COVID. It was a sort of war on our freedoms and on what we considered to be our reality. It was a real reality check. Unfortunately, it cost a lot of lives. So mental health crisis that came out of COVID, let us watch out for it and let us not blame each other for it and let us rise above it and do what we can, yeah, to work on, like Grace is saying, work with your natural gifts and talents. Yes, work with your natural gifts and talents. They're there, they're hiding. Try your best, even in a very small way. It doesn't have to be a big thing. If you're a good cook, you're a good chef. I've seen people, even men, coming on TikTok and showing, like they're doing cooking on TikTok. And now they're advertising cookery equipment, culinary sets. People are using them to advertise their stuff, which is really good. So they're associated with brands now. And these are men, they're actually showing themselves cooking. I love that. I love the fact that people are showing their skills off online. And I think we should use the social media in a positive way to try to grow ourselves. So here we are, we're trying to show our talent here with Suzanne for talking and chatting and using our 25,000 words to encourage and empower you. But the idea is, yeah, let's use the talent that we have because we still have that. They haven't taken it from us, and nobody will ever take that from us. Yeah, and Grace agrees in the comments. Susan?
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of us got engaged in what we were calling COVID manenos. This is where we were doing using our skills to just do all types of things. I'm sure we all found out little things we could do with our hands, with some people were making handicrafts, all type of activities and projects, little things that could help you earn a few shillings if possible. Um,
Yeah,
to boost the um, you know, to help you earn a few shillings to diversify
yeah.
your income source. Others even started like growing food. They had little gardens
Mm-hmm.
outside. My second daughter, she started a garden outside. Actually, that's when she she wanted to contribute to the household somehow, so she started a garden outside. And right now, both my
That's
daughters
fantastic.
are, they've grown. They've got a very busy garden. We're eating some of the products here, the
Really?
tomatoes and stuff. Yeah, and people took up a lot of activities that they enjoyed doing. Some people who never jogged before because they were felt too confined in the house started doing exercises and running, up and down on the streets outside, which was great. I mean, there's some positive things which came out of it, and it's
Mm-hmm.
always best to look at something in a positive view. Otherwise, um, recovering from things like depression is not easy. It's something that once it gets grip of you, it can really be very very difficult. And as Fimo said, it's very important to build that resilience by being creative, innovative, and thinking positively, discovering new talents, using this, like she said, the social media in a positive way. There's so much information. You can even learn a language, by the way, online. You can learn a language online. You can learn several languages online. You can even listen to books. If you don't like to read, you can even just listen to the books. There are so many audiobooks, wonderful writing. Learn how to play a game you've always wanted to learn how to play, whether it's chess or drafts or whatever it is, and so many things that you could do. You know, find out more about certain subjects that made you've been curious about, but you never really had time to sit down and look into it. But now you can. So let's not be. Let's use our time well. Let us keep our minds occupied, because when we are not, our minds are not occupied. That's when things go south. For the institutions, definitely having these policies that really protect your workers, whether they're working at home or in the office, that is so important. That is so important because, as Queen Mo said, some some people feel safer in the office than at home. And that Australian case I told you about was very, very real. They discovered they had to do that because the women were really, really suffering and not being productive. And one of the other impacts that we didn't talk about was in the workplace. So, for instance, like my son, where he was working, if one
Mm-hmm.
person in the area where he was working was tested positive for COVID, the whole section would have to stay home and work from the house. So he
Oh, yeah.
would go into the office for 2 days in a week, then somebody is tested positive and the whole section has to go stay home. And now they're working from home. And that adjustment of working from home, literally doing 9 to 5 is so important. Some
Mm-hmm.
systems have maintained that virtual system, like for instance the court system here in Kenya. You attend
Mm-hmm.
court online, you don't have to physically go there, which has its advantages. You save time. You can do something else while you're waiting for your case to be called. You don't have to travel and be in a very crowded place. The courts can get very, 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 very crowded. I'm sure you've seen from the TV when you're watching these big cases. How many people are standing in that room? I don't even know how they managed to stand in that room. Yeah, so COVID was indeed, there are a lot of mental health issues that occurred as a result of that. Those people who already had mental health issues suffered even more greatly as a result of that. The whole change of the system. People perhaps who have things like ADHD and those and autism, who are on the autistic spectrum, they suffered a lot because all this change is not good, especially for people who suffer from autism. They're it's not a, let me not say suffer, but people who are autistic,
Mm-hmm.
they like routines. So when this routine changed, I'm sure it was very, very, very difficult for them. Those people who have ADHD, where your behavior is, your stuff is being controlled, your activities, you can't go swimming the way you used to swim, you can't go this way, you can't do that. That was a problem. People in the entertainment, the singers, the people who sing in the hotels and stuff like that, the people do the dramas and stuff like that. They really, really, really suffered. In fact, they were out of business for a very, very long time. So, indeed, COVID was a learning uh, process for us, and um, I think Grace has mentioned something like that about going forward. Will we be able to be better prepared to deal with that? Will we cope better to another lockdown? Will we, you know, will we have, will our health system be up to it? Will our health workers be up to it? Because there's a lot of adjustment even among the health workers. They had to change a lot, even the way they handle the patients. They had to change the protocols of receiving people. They had to change so many things. The police too, because they were doing their curfew, checks and guarding the roads. And if you were driving beyond curfew, you had to have a letter. If it was from a hospital, literally, you had to get a stamped letter from the hospital to explain where you're coming from. Otherwise, you'll be in the cell. Now, if they put you in the cell, people in the cell have COVID. So it was just like a vicious cycle. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was certainly a learning time for all of us, and I hope we've learned the positive lessons from it.
Thank you, Susan. And Grace is saying one positive outcome was the ability to work from home and work schedules that don't necessarily need your physical presence. That can bring some kind of mental peace. It's true. There's a lot of people who discovered working from home. Apart from the benefits of not being physically present at the office and having your space, which gives you mental peace, they also found that they could multitask and look after their children, especially like in countries where they don't get that help. So people spent a lot more time with their kids. Mothers who are breastfeeding their babies, they could spend longer time with their babies at home. And right now they're totally unreluctant. No, they're totally reluctant about going back to the workplace. You see, when, for example, Donald Trump ordered all federal employees to start going back to the office, what I heard in the UK, in the US, is that a lot of people moved to places, to cities that are, or towns that were cheaper. They even bought properties that were farther away. And now it's almost impossible for them to commute to the office because they have hybrid working where they only were required in the office once or twice a week or once or twice a month. And so they could do that maybe a whole day drive to the office. But now people are going to get to the point where they might have to sell their homes or have second homes. Like in the UK, what happened is that there's something else that came up, which is the Monday to Friday rentals in the city of London. Yeah, so for example, you'll have your home somewhere outside of London for people who are working maybe in the main city like London, for example. So then you would be taking up a room in a house from Monday to Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday, you're out, you're back at your home. It's so amazing. So couples were separated that way because of this hybrid working environment. So there are some positive things also that came about because we know that there's some very successful people on TikTok. Those who came on board early on TikTok, they're selling their stuff like nobody's business. Some people learned skills over that period. Other people started YouTube channels and they thrived by telling stories because people had a lot of time to sit down and watch. Yeah. So people, I know specific YouTubers who really boomed during that period. Like they say, one man's meat is another man's poison. Yes, so so when this every situation offers an opportunity for those people who know how to grab it. So even in this depressed and difficult economic period, there's always something that can help you thrive. Look for that thing. It just needs a mind shift. So, on that note, guys, I think I want to say good night and good day for wherever you're watching from. And thank all those in the comment section and those who are watching us. Thank you for the thumbs up. And thank you very, very much, Grace Gender, for all your wonderful points. Unfortunately, you're always the only one for some reason, but it doesn't matter. Don't worry, Grace. Next time you're going to find other people here. Usually we have our shows a bit later. Maybe that's the reason why you're finding fewer people here. But we hope that those people who were not able to join us here will watch later on and comment. And join us tomorrow and on Wednesday for our politics shows. On Mondays, we have local politics, and on Wednesdays, we have geopolitics and a bit of local politics. So look forward to seeing you tomorrow evening and have a good night all. Bye bye. Take care of your mental health. Bye bye.
Bye. Yeah.
Okay, bye bye. Thank you, Susan.